The empire was growing. The rising sun flew over Manchuria, its soldiers hailed as heroes, its factories alive with the rhythm of victory. In Tokyo, generals promised that a new age had begun, an age where Japan would lead Asia, and the world would finally bow to its strength. But beneath the parades and speeches, a darker truth was taking shape. The conquest of Manchuria had unleashed a hunger that could not be satisfied. The army, drunk on success, wanted more. They saw China not as a neighbor, but as a prize, vast, weak, and waiting to be taken. In 1932, barely months after Manchukuo was born, Japanese Marines landed in Shanghai. It began with gunfire in the streets, a clash between Chinese protesters and Japanese civilians that spiraled into chaos. Artillery thundered through the city, smoke darkened the skies, and thousands died before the diplomats could stop the bloodshed. The world was horrified. Japan called it self-defense. And once again, the League of Nations did nothing. For many in Japan's army, the lesson was clear: the world would protest, but it would never act. And so the generals planned their next step: total domination of China. In 1933, Japan withdrew completely from the League of Nations. In the Grand Hall of Geneva, delegates watched as the Japanese representative stood, bowed, and walked away. The doors closed behind him, and Japan's isolation was complete. No more diplomacy. No more restraint. Only destiny. The following years were filled with preparation. The army expanded, the navy built new carriers and bombers, and young men were taught that dying for the emperor was the highest honor. Children in schools sang songs of conquest, farmers donated metal for bullets. In the villages, priests prayed for victory. In Tokyo, the war machine roared to life. Then, in the summer of 1937, the spark came near Beijing. At a small bridge called Marco Polo, Japanese troops were training at night when a single shot rang out. No one knows who fired it. Some say it was an accident. Others say it was planned. But in the confusion, the army demanded entry into a nearby Chinese town to search for missing soldiers. The Chinese refused. Within hours, gunfire erupted. The Marco Polo Bridge Incident, a small clash that ignited a continent. Within days, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. Tens of thousands of soldiers crossed the border, bombers filled the skies. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun. The Japanese army advanced with ruthless precision. Beijing and Tianjin fell within weeks. Shanghai, defended by Chinese troops and foreign volunteers, became a city of fire. Bombs rained down on neighborhoods, flames devoured entire districts, and the Huangpu River filled with wreckage. Civilians fled in panic as the sky burned red. The Japanese troops fought fiercely, disciplined, relentless, trained to obey without question. But behind their courage was something far darker: the belief that China's people were inferior, that mercy was weakness. This belief would lead to horrors that scarred the world forever. By December 1937, the Imperial Army reached the Chinese capital, Nanjing. The city was poorly defended, its soldiers exhausted. As the Japanese surrounded it, refugees poured through the gates, carrying children, belongings, and fear. When the city fell, what followed was not war, but slaughter. For 6 weeks, Nanjing became hell. Tens of thousands of prisoners were executed, shot by machine guns beside the riverbanks. Women were raped and killed, homes were looted, temples burned. The river Yangtze ran red with blood. Foreigners who stayed behind wrote diaries and photographs that would one day testify to the madness. The Japanese government denied it, but the truth could not be buried. The rape of Nanjing became one of history's darkest chapters, yet even as reports reached Tokyo, the government celebrated. Newspapers called it victory, crowds cheered in the streets. Few dared speak of what really happened. The war was now unstoppable, driven by pride, fear, and the myth of destiny. As Japan expanded deeper into China, it found itself trapped in the land it sought to conquer. The Chinese, led by Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist army, refused to surrender. From the mountains to the rivers, they fought on, stubborn, desperate, unbroken. Even the communists under Mao Zedong joined the resistance, turning villages into fortresses and peasants into soldiers. The Japanese captured city after city, Nanjing, Wuhan, Guangzhou, but the land never yielded. For every town they took, another uprising began behind them. Guerrillas cut supply lines, snipers struck from the shadows, and entire divisions vanished into the endless countryside. The war that was supposed to last months turned into a quagmire that would bleed Japan dry. By 1938, Japan controlled much of eastern China, but victory was an illusion. The empire's resources were stretched thin. Soldiers went hungry, ammunition ran low, and morale began to crumble. At home, families wept for sons who would never return. The glory of Manchuria had turned into the mud of China. Still, the generals refused to retreat. They believed surrender meant dishonor worse than death. To admit failure was impossible, and so the war dragged on, consuming men, fuel, and hope. In the skies, Japanese bombers turned cities into ash. In the countryside, villages burned under the sun. The world watched in horror, but did nothing. Western nations condemned Japan's brutality but feared another world war. Only one country, the United States, began to take notice. In Washington, American officials studied reports of Nanjing, of bombings, of atrocities. Slowly, the view of Japan changed. Once seen as a rising modern power, it was now seen as a threat, a nation gone mad with ambition. The first economic sanctions appeared, small at first, but like seeds of future conflict. By 1939, the war had reached a stalemate. Japan held the cities and the coast, China held the interior. Millions were dead, and neither side could win. But across the sea, another storm was brewing. In Europe, Germany had invaded Poland. The world was once again at war. To the Japanese leadership, this was opportunity. They watched as France, Britain, and the Netherlands turned their eyes toward Europe, and saw the colonies of Southeast Asia left unguarded. Oil, rubber, and tin, the lifeblood Japan needed. If they could take those, they could finish their conquest of China and secure their empire forever, but there was a price. The United States stood in the way. Its Pacific Fleet in Hawaii and its bases in the Philippines guarded the route south. Some generals began to whisper, sooner or later, Japan would have to fight America. By the end of the 1930s, Japan was victorious and trapped at the same time, a master of Asia's coast, but prisoner of its own war. The soldiers still sang of glory, the emperor's image still hung in every classroom, the rising sun still waved above conquered lands. Yet beneath the songs and flags, a question haunted the nation: how long could this last? In the dark fields of China, thousands of Japanese soldiers stared up at the night sky, wondering if they would ever see home again. The war that had promised honor had delivered only endless death. And still, the order came, advance. In the quiet of Tokyo, a few men in high offices began to see the truth. They knew Japan could not fight China forever. It needed oil, steel, and time. And to get them, it would have to look beyond the Asian mainland, across the Pacific, toward the islands of America. The path that began at Marco Polo Bridge would lead to Pearl Harbor. The rising sun was still climbing, but already, the world was preparing for the day it would fall.